Okay, so without further ado, Bluetooth and why we need more people studying it. Just a disclaimer, these views are entirely my own, don't reflect my employer or any other third parties. And I want to make it clear that I'm not really involved in like the creation of a lot of the tools or the research that I'm going to be talking about today. I'm not that cool. I'm just kind of here to share some information, maybe anyone interested in getting started, because Bluetooth is kind of complicated and it can be a little bit hard to get into the security aspects of it. So let's go ahead. I did a bit of talking with Bryson before now about what I do, but I'm an automotive cybersecurity technology architect at White Motion. We specialize in automotive cybersecurity, as you may have guessed from the job title, and I'm based in Tokyo, speak 3 languages, English, Arabic, and Japanese. And I've been involved in security since my days in school. I started in automotive security, and as it is with security, you just kind of branch out and learn more about different things because it's all really fun and everyone loves learning something cool like cybersecurity stuff. Maybe that's just me, but I like to call myself a jack of some trades and a master of none because I'm not especially good at any one thing, I feel. But my recent areas of interest academic wise have been Bluetooth, USB protocol, RFID stuff, and then digital forensics. And yeah, so let's get into the content. So a basic look at Bluetooth. So Bluetooth is a very common cable replacement technology. It's found in pretty much every smartphone in the entire world. Most wireless headsets will use Bluetooth protocol to connect to your phone or your laptop or whatever device you plan on using it for. It's really become ubiquitous as the short-range wireless technology that most devices in the IoT use. It operates in the 2.4 gigahertz frequency range, so that's actually the same frequency range as Wi-Fi. 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, of course. So they share a lot of similarities on the physical level, but Bluetooth has a couple of quirks included in it that make it quite different. For example, it utilizes frequency hopping. So within that 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, the Bluetooth protocol has a way of hopping frequencies, like that's like a slice of it each time, and they hop, I don't know, I think it's between 40 channels for Bluetooth low energy, and it's even more for Bluetooth classic, which is the higher speed, higher data rate Bluetooth that's used in most devices that aren't like really low power sensors, so on and so forth. But Bluetooth low energy is starting to become, obviously more popular too. And yeah, just some basic information on the screen there, like for sensor data, audio data, file transfers, so on and so forth. It's not, here we go. Okay, so a quick look at the organization of the Bluetooth protocol. So, okay, sorry, my presenter view kind of looked a little bit weird there, but anyway, so what I've got here is I've split the Bluetooth protocol into a kind of a sliced view. So we can see at the top near the computer icon, those are the RFCOM, SDP, and L2 cap layers, and below that you have the boxes in red. Those are the controller level protocols. So the host protocols, as we call the ones in blue up at the top, they're the ones that are controlled by the operating system, right? So every operating system, be it Linux, Mac, Windows, Android, they'll have its own way of interacting with the Bluetooth software in the chip, which we call the controller side of things, right? And then in the middle, I was trying to be clever, so I mixed blue and red into the purple host controller interface. That's actually the protocol that the host uses to communicate with its controller in order to carry out all of the Bluetooth specific functions. So one of the big challenges I'll be talking a little bit more about later, is that there isn't a lot of, it's not easy to kind of pass from the higher level layers to the lower level layers from a user perspective. So a short history of Bluetooth security. So when Bluetooth first came out in the early 2000s, there were a lot of gimmicks that really exploited the fact that it wasn't implemented properly in a lot of places. There was no mandatory encryption on communications, and there were like little tools you could find that would like send somebody a business card without their knowledge, and it would just pop up on their phone, or ways you could crash like some early Bluetooth stacks just by sending a bunch of random L2 cap data to it. So there were a lot of problems with it in the beginning, but they kind of fixed them gradually. And the big fix as far as security goes happened with the release of the Bluetooth 2.1 plus extended data rate update. So that was when they introduced mandatory encryption for all communications, all connection-based communications, except for service discovery. So if you remember from the slide before, the SDP protocol in the host section is actually, it stands for Service Discovery Protocol. And that's how a Bluetooth device kind of advertises to any devices nearby what kind of services it provides. So if it's a car, if it's a, it'll have like the audio, hands-free audio kind of phone call feature. If it's a cell phone, it might have phone book access, and that's actually the protocol that it uses to share your contacts from your phone with your car. If you have one of those cars that will actually pull your contact list from your phone, that's done through the phone book access protocol. It also introduced something called, Bluetooth 2.1 introduced something called secure simple pairing, which introduced a couple of different ways to pair your phones. Pairing is the process by which two Bluetooth devices establish a connection, a trusted connection, and they say, okay, I recognize this device as a device that I want to communicate with, and from here on, we'll be able to send communications securely back and forth. Before that, there was only one way to do pairing, and that was through a, like a 4-digit PIN or something like that. It's so this was good in practice, right? Like both people on the phones, if they're pairing their cell phones, they put in the same PIN, and then you would get a secure communication, and you could send data back and forth. But well, some objects don't have user input interfaces, right? Like headphones, so they would have hardwired pins, which is obviously not a great idea from a security perspective, because they could be generic across like an OEM. So maybe every device from this OEM has the default 0000 pin, so on and so forth.
Or 1, 2, 3, 4, because those are easy. They're really hard to guess.
Yeah, 1 0 0 0 1 2 3 4. Any of those really simple ones. But then the thing is that after the Bluetooth 2.1 spec, a lot of the research kind of died down. Some of the reasons for that I'll be going over right here. Bluetooth is really complicated in that it's not a specific, software stack. It's like a specification that's developed and maintained by the Bluetooth Special Interest Group, which is the group that writes the spec. And the implementations vary a lot between the chip OEMs and their different operating environments. And like I mentioned before, it operates in 2.4 gigahertz, but you can't sniff it like you can with Wi-Fi. Because of that frequency hopping that it does, it's incredibly hard to follow a Bluetooth communication the same way you could follow just one channel of like a Wi-Fi signal, right? It's possible. You just need about $20,000–$30,000 worth of equipment, and which makes it incredibly inaccessible. I know that Michael Osman and Great Scott Gadgets, they came out with the Ubertooth 1, which is a cool device that can be used to do some level of Bluetooth sniffing. It's useful for, it's really good at doing like recon stuff, but you can't really call it a full Bluetooth sniffer just because of the complexity of the protocol. And then I mentioned this before when we were looking at the kind of Bluetooth stack slice view. The host controller interface is kind of the last bit you get to see through the operating system, which means there aren't a lot of tools made for interacting with those lower level protocols. For example, the link manager protocol, for a long time, it's just been kind of a black box because that's all based on the chip designer's firmware, and it's not easy to get in touch with that. It's not easy to reverse engineer that stuff because you'd have to rip the chip and dump the firmware and try and figure out all the instructions, so on and so forth, which some people have done, I'll be talking about later, but it's definitely a huge hurdle to get over. And the spec is very complicated. So looking at some modern Bluetooth research, back in 2017, a set of high-profile Bluetooth vulnerabilities came out discovered by Armis Labs. These gave an attacker the ability to essentially get daemon level privileges on any Bluetooth device, even if it wasn't discoverable, right? And this is obviously a big deal. You could get remote code execution with high privilege level, means you can install backdoors, set up, I'm not going to go into the whole post exploitation talk, right? Because that's just literally open-ended. You could go on forever. But this vulnerability is actually still very relevant. Within the last 2 weeks, Tencent Keen Security Lab, they released a piece of research that they did. They were doing on some Toyota cars, some Lexus vehicles manufactured outside of Japan from 2016 to 2019, where all of the head units inside these vehicles were susceptible to these blue-borne vulnerabilities. And that actually let them install a backdoor where the headset would automatically connect to a given access point, and then they could then SSH into it at daemon privilege, because that's the privilege at which Bluetooth stack runs. And from there, they had access to some of the CAN buses in the car. And that's obviously, well, for anyone that knows about vehicle networking, that's kind of a big deal. But I encourage everyone to read more about that. I won't go too into detail there. But then internal blue in 2018, and then subsequently knob in 2019. So internal blue is it's a framework for interacting with Broadcom Bluetooth chips that grants the user access to lower layer functions. So a bunch of researchers out in Europe, they actually did the hard work, they did the legwork of going and ripping a couple of Broadcom chips and reverse engineering the firmware and understanding how Broadcom styles the software in the chips. And they actually developed this open source firmware that's available for anyone to download for free, where you can get the way it's done is you get like an old smartphone that has one of these chips in it. For example, the Nexus 5 is currently the most well-supported phone. And you just make a few changes to the software stack through the Android debugger, and then you can then use that phone to send arbitrary link management layer packets, right? Which has led to a lot of vulnerabilities being disclosed. And actually, they disclosed another one just this past week. Like, this is, honestly, I would say this is one of the most amazing tools for Bluetooth research, because it's really at the forefront of the cutting edge discoveries. There's so much more to be said about internal blue, but just know that it's there. And then that it led into the key negotiation of Bluetooth attack, which was another high profile Bluetooth issue that was found last year in 2019. Essentially, part of the protocol that was checked, and okayed for the last 20 years that Bluetooth has been using, was that the entropy for the encryption used in communication between devices was negotiable, and the minimum entropy size for this encryption was 1 byte. And so by modifying the firmware on one device, you were then able to force the encryption key entropy size down to 1 byte, which essentially makes it trivial to brute force. And then you could have an eavesdropper listen into this communication. It's also theorized that it could be done through remote jamming, reactive jamming, sorry, which has already been proved. There are studies showing that it's a viable attack technique for wireless communications, but I don't think that anyone's actually done that in practice yet, but it is still definitely relevant. So some of the tools that I recommend anyone interested in starting with Bluetooth research make themselves familiar with. BlueZ is a Linux Bluetooth stack with APIs available for Python, in Python for easy applications, and in C as well. It's included in most Linux distributions. It's really easy to use. There's a great book online that's quite old now, but it gives you really all you need to get started with Bluetooth. Bluetooth Stack Smasher is one that I've used. It's a very simple application that just kind of allows you to fuzz some higher layer Bluetooth protocol packets against any target. SpoofTooth is a nice tool that allows you to set up your Linux environment as a kind of a, how do I say, a bug. Like, it kind of watches for Bluetooth devices, and you can actually program it to automatically detect and copy or try and spoof another Bluetooth device. And then the aforementioned Eternal Blue is a really, really powerful set of tools developed by the lab, the CMO lab in Europe. And it's been used to uncover some really prominent vulnerabilities, and it's available for anyone to get started with their own research. on their GitHub that I have linked later in the excuse me, later in the presentation. So I have a short, not live demo, just showing how to get started with using Bluetooth in a Linux environment. I'm just going to check the time. Hopefully I'm not going too far. Let me just here. So the first, oh, whoops, that's not the right video player. If we don't have time for both of these, then I'll happily truncate the second one. But the first one here is just showing a quick demo of how you can actually get started with reconning for Bluetooth devices on your Linux machine. So we're going to go over how to set up your devices using HCI configuration and kind of see some of the information that you can get from your Linux machine using these tools. So I already have them all installed, of course, I won't be going over that part, but HCI config is included in almost, I think, any Linux distro that uses BlueZ. So when you enter HCI configuration, you can see some information such as the number of Bluetooth interfaces you have on your computer, their Bluetooth addresses, their device classes, right? So this class number, I didn't really mention too much about it, but it's essentially a number that describes what kind of device it is that you're using, right? And so that can actually be changed on some Bluetooth chips. So most of the chips inside your computer won't let you change the Bluetooth class. But if you have an external dongle, I use one from Cambridge Silicon. It actually lets you change the Bluetooth class on it, which will make it easier to connect to some devices. For example, a car will usually reject a connection from a computer because it just knows that I'm not supposed to be talking to a computer most of the time. But if you can trick your car into thinking that your computer is a cell phone, you have a bit of an easier time getting connected. But sorry, I'm getting off track. So the next tool is Bluetooth control.
No,
Bluetooth
you're
CPO.
adding great value. Don't even say that. This is great.
Thank you. Oh, so this tool is the actual connection manager tool for BlueZ. Documentation on this is kind of hard to find in my own experience. I found it a little bit hard to use getting started. But once you get used to it, it's not so bad. So you essentially can list the number of devices or interfaces on your device, on your computer, and then you can select one and start scanning with it. And so here I've actually found my phone. My phone is called Alundite, right? So that's where it is. Has tab completion where you can, ask to pair with that device. You just confirm the passkey by typing in yes, and then once you've paired, it'll show you some information in the form of universally unique IDs, and each one of those corresponds to a service through the service discovery protocol. So you can actually ask it again for some more info, and it'll show you some things like the name of the device, what its class is, icon phone, so on and so forth. If it supports legacy pairing, which most modern devices don't, but if you find one that does, then that's a good place to snoop around, see if you can force it into pairing with a legacy device and get some, security stuff going on. Another really cool tool is the HCI tool info, which comes default with BlueZ. So this one lets you kind of remotely ask a device like, hey, send me some information. And this is where you can get some really, really good information because, for example, it will show you the manufacturer of the Bluetooth chip being used by the device. So when it comes to like testing a black box device, like a car, for example, you don't really want to tear it out and open it up and find out what kind of Bluetooth chip it's using, but you can at least learn some basic information on who the manufacturer is through HCI tool info. And then the last one I'm going to be showing is the SDP tool browse. So this lets you, again, ping a device and just say, hey, I want you to tell me all of the services that you support and give me some of the information about them. And so this will then tell you all of the different profiles that this device is using, as well as the RF comm channels that they're communicating on. This is important if you want to set up like a serial connection to a Bluetooth device, which is pretty common. You can actually get a serial connection and send data to it from your phone or from your laptop over a wireless serial port. And I think that does it for this video. And then the second video recorded demo that I have is actually how to record the HCI traffic, right? Oh, this again, whoops. All right, let's open this in the correct video player. Okay, so here I'm just going to show a quick demo of how to record the host controller interface traffic on a Bluetooth on a Linux machine. There are different ways to do this depending on your operating system. In Android, there's actually the ability to enable this information to be logged automatically into a log file. It's really easy. All you need to do is enable developer options, and then it's there in the developer options. But on Bluetooth, on BlueZ in Linux, you can set it up so that it stores all of the HCI packets that the device sees to a log file or a text file. And then if you save it to the log file, for example, the output is actually such that you can open it later in Wireshark and have a slightly more user-friendly kind of protocol breakdown view of the data that you just recorded. So here I'm just showing that I'm opening the file in Wireshark. And while that opens, I think I should maybe mention that when you do this kind of recording, you're not really logging the packets that you send live over the air, unfortunately. Right? That's not what the BTMon or the HCI log do. These are actually just recording the packets being sent from your host, so your operating system, to the chip, right? So that's the HCI packets, which means it goes back to the fact that a lot of those lower level protocols are rather inaccessible, just because they're kind of set up in such a way that it's not easy to, okay, there we go. Yeah, there's kind of set up in a way where you can't easily reach the lower layer protocols from the operating system, which was a big hurdle in the research of those lower layer protocols, which is starting to get picked up by, like I said, the internal Blue team. So a quick look at the references I've used. I don't know if these slides will be made available, but if they aren't, my contact info is at the end. You're welcome to ask me, and I'll happily send you this presentation and any other. If you have any questions, I'm always happy to talk about Bluetooth stuff. But I want to make it clear, I'm not like a master or a wizard of Bluetooth. I'm just a guy who's had to teach himself a little bit over the last few months, and thought I'd share what I know and what I've encountered. So thank you, everyone. Special thanks to Spencer McIntyre for all his help in putting together my presentation. He did a great job coaching me, and he really gave me some important feedback on like the length of the demos and how I should space my how I should manage my time on the presentation. And of course, big thank you to the GRIM team for putting this together. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope everyone was able to learn something today, either from me or from any of the other presenters, because I do believe I'm the last one on the new speaker track. But yeah, my contact info is up there on the screen, and a lot of clever things to say. So
it's awesome. So by sharing what you've had to learn over the last couple of months, that tells me A, passion, B, up to date. Like my Bluetooth knowledge is pretty out of date, so there were a couple things in there I'm going, got to check that out. So very meaningful for me. I think I speak for everyone. I know Alexander just said very nice presentation. Aditya also said thank you for the explanation on Bluetooth research and limitations. Neil says Kamel mentioned that Bluetooth sniffing isn't that simple to do. Does that mean that there's no significant risk of data being sniffed with the upcoming Apple/Google COVID API apps?
So I've heard a little bit about the Apple / like the kind of monumental Apple/Google, like, you know, hand in hand working on these Bluetooth things. I don't know too much in detail about them, but in general, Bluetooth is very safe against being sniffed by, you know, third parties. In the case of the knob attack that I mentioned before, an attacker needs to successfully, I guess, influence the key size negotiation to force it to be only 1 byte of entropy for the encryption, and then it can be brute forced and decoded in real time, right? But normally that's not really an issue, because most devices, actually all Apple devices, an interesting thing about the knob attack, for example, is that Apple's specific firmware was, instead of using the minimum of 1 byte that the protocol specifies, they set their minimum to 7, right? Which was really, you know, bravo to Apple. Like, just because it's written in the spec doesn't mean it's a good idea, right? They were kind of like, no, this seems like this could end badly someday, so we're not gonna do that. We're gonna change this 1 to a 7, and then from there, you know. So that was I was actually very impressed by Apple, and I think Apple does a good job as far as securing their own devices. But specifically about this joint Google Apple Bluetooth stuff that's coming out lately, I'd be, I guess, speaking in ignorance if I tried to say anything more.
Fair enough.
I don't know, meaning than that. Sorry.
Always good to say. Let's see. We got from Luce, are the Bluetooth specifications behind paywalls? I was looking over the Wikipedia page. I didn't see any direct links to official specs.
So I believe the specification is actually free for anyone to download. If you go to the Bluetooth Special Interest Group's website, right? If you just Google Bluetooth SIG, you should pull up their website. And I believe they do have downloads for for some of the most recent Bluetooth specifications. They're rather thick, a couple thousand pages, but I do think that they are free for anyone to download. Yeah.
Excellent. Let's see. Neil says, appreciate. That was a curveball question, but thanks for the answer. And let's see. No, you did a great job. Thank you with all the history and some details about. You know, there's a lot of people who don't understand the difference between the signaling of Bluetooth versus Wi-Fi, and so they don't quite grasp why we can sniff one and not the other very easily. And I really liked you going into why Ubluetooth 1 was good for initial recon, but really not great for a lot of things, and particularly when you get into to the later specs, the 4.1 LT low power and other things. You gave a great summary of tools to look into, hacking tools, and the Linux Bluetooth stack. I loved your demos. They were great because some of us are too smart for live demos. I'm not one of those people, but one of my colleagues, Tim Brom, he is amazing and has done some awesome recorded demos because demos go wrong. And so it was really nice to be able to watch and have you just kind of chill out and talk through the thing instead of worrying about whether it was going to go right or whatever. That was great. I did get more than one request for the slides and presentation to be posted. If we don't provide that for you, and I don't know, can I recommend a GitHub repo and just put them all in there, or Google Drive and share it out with all three, but the slides as well as the demo videos, if you're willing.
Oh, of course.
Very nice pieces of work. Appreciated it a great deal. Any last questions, anyone? Because otherwise, we've got about 11 minutes before Dave Kennedy finishes us off in track 2. So we'll need to get back to track 2. You can get back to track 2 easily from just going to the GRIMMCon webpage and clicking on the link. But with that, thank you so much, Kamel. Thank you for all of you who showed up and were able to provide questions, feedback, comments, and I hope that you all got a lot out of this. I know that I did. You have a great day.
Thank you.